Michael Jordan didn't just refuse to sign NASCAR's deal. He took them to court, sat on the witness stand, and walked out with a win that changed the sport forever. And it all started with one missed deadline. This is the full story of how one of the most powerful men in sports took on the most powerful organization in racing, and what it meant for Bubba Wallace, for 23XI Racing, and for every single team that straps in every weekend. Michael Jordan is known worldwide for his legendary basketball career, 6 championships, 6 Finals MVP awards, and a brand that still generates over $44 million annually in royalties alone. But in recent years, he has been making waves in a completely different arena. In September 2020, Jordan co-founded 23XI Racing alongside active Cup Series driver Denny Hamlin, purchasing a NASCAR Cup Series charter from Germain Racing to launch the team. They debuted at the 2021 Daytona 500, and from day one the team made its presence felt. Bubba Wallace took the wheel of the number 23 car. Tyler Reddick joined as a second driver. Big sponsors came on board. Race wins followed. By 2024, the team was one of the most competitive operations in the sport, with Tyler Reddick winning the regular season championship. 10 or more Cup wins since 2021. Everything looked extraordinary on the outside. But behind the scenes, a war was quietly building, one that would eventually land Michael Jordan on a witness stand inside a federal courtroom. To understand what happened next, you have to understand what a NASCAR charter actually is and why it matters so much. A charter in NASCAR works similarly to a franchise in other major sports leagues. It guarantees your team a starting spot in each of the 36 points races every single season. Without a charter, you are what the sport calls an open car. You show up to the track hoping there is room in the field, and if there is not, you go home without racing and without earning a single dollar from that event. There are only 36 charters in NASCAR for a field that accommodates 40 cars, which means 4 spots per race are contested by open teams. But the guaranteed entry is only part of what makes a charter so valuable. A charter also determines how much money your team receives from the television deal, from race purses, from historical performance payouts, and from the car owner standings. Without a charter, teams receive almost none of that guaranteed income. Teams without charters rely on sponsorships for as much as 70% of their total revenue, making financial planning unpredictable and fragile. Having a charter is the difference between financial stability and financial survival in NASCAR. That is not an exaggeration. That is the reality of how the sport operates. The current charter system was introduced in 2016. At the time, it was described as a way to provide financial stability and investment security for teams. But from the very beginning, team owners had concerns. The biggest issue was that charters were temporary, not permanent. They expired. And the revenue distribution model was deeply skewed. Under the previous television deal, teams received only 25% of the TV revenue, while NASCAR itself kept 10% and the tracks received 65%. The tracks, notably, are mostly owned by NASCAR itself, which means the organization was effectively taking 75% of the television money on both sides of the equation. Curtis Polk, an investor in 23XI Racing and Michael Jordan's longtime business manager, addressed this directly back in October 2022, saying, "The sustainability of the teams in this sport is not very long-term unless we have a fundamental change in the business model." That warning went largely unaddressed for 2 full years. In September 2024, NASCAR gave teams a hard Friday night deadline to sign new charter agreements covering the period from 2025 through 2031. This new deal was tied to a massive $7.7 billion media rights package involving Fox Sports, NBC, Amazon, and Warner Bros. Discovery. Under the new proposal, teams would reportedly receive between 35 and 40% of the television revenue, an improvement over the previous deal but one that came with conditions, including teams giving up other rights that could have generated additional income. Most teams signed. Brad Keselowski, co-owner of RFK Racing, confirmed his team agreed to the terms. He said, "We want to run NASCAR for a long time to come and sign the charter agreement, a statement to our commitment to doing just that." But 23XI Racing and Front Row Motorsports refused to meet the deadline. 23XI put out a formal statement that read, 23XI decided to not meet a NASCAR-imposed deadline last night to sign charter agreements for its 2 cars for 2025 to 2031. 23's position, as stated in a letter to NASCAR, is that we did not have an opportunity to fairly bargain for a new charter contract. Behind the scenes, 3 anonymous team representatives speaking to the Associated Press said that teams felt threatened and coerced by NASCAR officials to sign the extensions or risk having their charters revoked entirely. The situation had become so tense that Curtis Polk literally pinned a piece of paper to the back of his shirt during the Southern 500 at Darlington Raceway. It read, "Please don't ask me about my charter. I don't want to disparage NASCAR and lose it." That single act said more about the power dynamic between NASCAR and its teams than any press release ever could. Denny Hamlin spoke openly about the situation in the days that followed. He addressed the media ahead of the Cup Series race at Bristol Motor Speedway and said, "We've said we plan on racing next year no matter what. And we're sticking to that." He described the 6-hour window that teams had been given to sign the charter contract before the playoff opener in Atlanta as particularly challenging and restrictive. He said the negotiations had lacked fair bargaining opportunities for 2 full years. He also acknowledged the frustration of watching most other teams sign while 23XI held out, but added, "Every team does what's best for them." He reassured sponsors and partners that the charter dispute was strictly a matter of ownership and would not affect the job security of any team employees. But the impact on Bubba Wallace was undeniable and deeply personal. Bubba Wallace, the face of the number 23 car and one of the most visible and recognized drivers in the entire sport, could not get a contract extension signed because without a charter in place, there was no foundation to build a deal on. The team wanted to sign him. Wallace wanted to stay. But the charter uncertainty made it legally and financially impossible to formalize anything. Bubba Wallace addressed the situation publicly and said, "I know my process has been kind of going hand in hand with the charter agreement, so it's frustrating to see where we're at because that impacts my life and my livelihood and everything moving forward for my future." That was not a general complaint. That was a driver explaining that his career was being held hostage by a business dispute he had no control over. Denny Hamlin also confirmed that the team's plans to expand to a 3rd full-time car in 2025, potentially bringing Riley Herbst into the lineup, were completely on hold. Everything was frozen because the charter situation was unresolved. "Anything in the future certainly is dependent on things like that," Hamlin said. In October 2024, 23XI Racing and Front Row Motorsports took the most significant step possible. They filed a federal antitrust lawsuit against NASCAR and Jim France under the Sherman Act. The lawsuit argued that NASCAR operated as a monopoly with unchecked power over every aspect of the sport. The organization controlled most of the major tracks. It mandated the use of the next-gen car, which could only be built using NASCAR-approved suppliers, eliminating any outside competition in that space. It restricted how much revenue teams could earn and limited their independence to negotiate outside deals. It forced teams into short-term charter agreements that offered no raw long-term security or equity, and it had allegedly included an anti-disparagement clause in the new agreement, effectively preventing team owners from publicly criticizing NASCAR without risking their charters. Most teams signed the 2025-31 agreements under what sources described as duress. 23XI and Front Row Motorsports chose not to, and they raced without charters while the lawsuit proceeded. Michael Jordan himself took the witness stand during the trial. He stated that someone had to step forward and challenge the entity to understand that it is a real concern from our aspect, in terms of charters not being permanent or having better economic terms. He told the court he was all in to fix the long-term issues where teams put on the show every single weekend but got shortchanged in every financial arrangement. It was a direct, factual argument from one of the most competitive people on the planet, backed by legal power and financial resources that few team owners in any sport could match. After 8 days of trial, in December 2025, NASCAR settled. The terms were transformative for the entire sport. NASCAR granted permanent, evergreen charters to all teams. That means no more expiring agreements. No more teams being threatened with losing their guaranteed spots. No more 6-hour deadlines to sign contracts covering 7-year windows. Teams received improved revenue terms and better long-term financial stability across the board. The antitrust lawsuit filed by 23XI Racing and Front Row Motorsports was officially dismissed following the settlement. Both teams signed the new charter agreement under the updated terms. And Steve Phelps, who had served as NASCAR president since 2018 before being promoted to commissioner of NASCAR, resigned in the wake of the settlement. The power structure of the entire organization shifted as a direct result of what 23XI and Front Row Motorsports started with one missed deadline in September 2024. And while all of this was playing out legally and politically, 23XI Racing did not lose a single step on the racetrack. In early 2026, the team came out with dominant force. They won the Daytona 500. They won 4 of the first 6 races of the season. They are now considered part of the elite tier of NASCAR operations, alongside the sport's most established powerhouse teams. Bubba Wallace did sign a multi-year contract extension to remain with the team. Michael Jordan told journalist Gayle King that the entire fight was 100% personal. He wanted to compete. He wanted to reshape the sport as a competitor. And he won on both fronts. The scale of what happened here goes far beyond 23XI Racing or Bubba Wallace's contract situation. Jordan exposed a system where team owners invested tens of millions of dollars every single season, employed hundreds of people, provided the cars and the competition that fans paid to watch, and still held almost no long-term security or equity in the sport they were financing. The charter system as it existed before the lawsuit gave NASCAR the power to take everything away at the end of a contract cycle. That is no longer the case. Every team in the NASCAR Cup Series now operates with a permanent charter because Michael Jordan and Front Row Motorsports refused to sign one piece of paper on one Friday night in September 2024. That single act of resistance, backed by 2 years of legal strategy and a willingness to race without guaranteed income, changed the economic foundation of the sport permanently. Now that you know the full story, drop a comment below and answer this. Do you think NASCAR deserved to lose this lawsuit? Was Jordan right to take it all the way to trial? And if you think Bubba Wallace should have been protected from all of this from day one, hit the like button right now because that is exactly the kind of story we bring you every single week on this channel. Share this with every NASCAR fan in your life who does not know the full picture of what went down. And subscribe so you never miss a breakdown like this one again.